When we think of Triumph sports cars, we tend to think of hairy-chested brutes like the TRs or the Stag. So what happens if they try and create a small, minimalist sports car where less is more? Well, you get the Spitfire. So is it worthy of the Triumph name? Is it as great as its TR and Stag bigger brothers? Let's take this Mk4 1300 for a drive and find out. But first, our friends at Lancaster Insurance are running monthly giveaways. You can win all sorts, from experience days to tools, restaurant vouchers and tech. So click the link below at the end of the video to enter their latest competition. MG and Austin Healey had quite a lot of success in the 30s right the way up to the 60s with diminutive, minimalist sports cars that made the most out of having the least. The Frog Eye Sprite, the Midget, the T-Type, cars that had sold in their hundreds of thousands the world over for celebrating how little you needed to make a fun roadster. And Standard Triumph decided that they wanted in on the action. Now, whereas the Frog Eye Sprite had been based on the Austin A30 and was therefore a monocoque, Triumph took the basis of their Herald Saloon, a car which, decidedly old school in its manner, was a separate chassis construction. And that meant it was easier to create a sports car from it. Take the body off the Herald, shorten its chassis, and bingo, the basis for a new sports car. Michelotti had been quite popular with Triumph for design up to this point. His penmanship had given Italian glamour and style to British favourites like the early TR sports cars and the Herald Saloon itself, which was achingly pretty for such a regular car. So he was commissioned to design the new Herald-based sports car as well. And what a success, or a triumph if you'd rather, he turned up with. A gorgeous little sports car that was modest and minimalist, and yet so pretty and so classy in a way that the MG Midget just never quite pulled off. Not only did it look great, but already the car had a great name. Spitfire, inspired by the classic British fighter plane, so Triumph were keen to get the new Spitfire into production. But struggling finances at the time meant that by 1962 they were under the control of British Leyland. Now, when Leyland's assessors went to Triumph HQ to see what they'd actually bought, they found a dusty, sheet-covered sports car prototype in the corner. When they pulled it off, they saw that it was an early Spitfire concept, and they fell in love with it. The pretty lines, the evocative British name, this was a car that needed to see production. By late 1962, the Spitfire 4 was ready for production. Now, the 4 is a bit of the name that was more of a teaser for what was to come, because initially Triumph had plans to put a 6-cylinder engine in it as well, which of course would become the Spitfire 6. But when it was unveiled, the Spitfire was an immediate hit, and it was affordable too. Starting at just £640, the new Triumph sports car was cheaper than the already quite aged and very minimalist MG Midget. Small wonder then that Triumph sold 45,000 Spitfire 4s in just over 2 years. Buoyed by that initial success, Triumph continued to evolve the Spitfire. Later in the life of the Mark I, it gained an overdrive gearbox to make it more usable on motorways. The Mark II version got a bigger, more powerful engine and nicer interior trim. The Mark III version had its styling slightly tweaked and updated for modern pedestrian impact laws, which if anything made it even more gorgeous. And it introduced a folding hood, which made it that much more practical and fast to get the roof up and down if slightly inclement British weather happened to occur. It also gained a 1296cc engine, which not only made it faster and more fun to fling around on a B road, but also more popular in America, where big American highways weren't really suited to the earlier 1147cc version. By 1968, Triumph had sold 100,000 of these cars, with 75% of all Spitfire production heading abroad. By 1970, this Mark IV Spitfire was released, and for me, it could be the best version of it. For a start, the rear end styling was tweaked to echo that of its Stag bigger brother, and because they were both designed by Michelotti, it fits beautifully. It really suits the little Spit. The front end design was also simplified, with a few of the lines taken out and a nicer flow to it. I think it's as gorgeous as it ever was. And inside, you've got a whole new dashboard with some new clocks and new instrument layout. It feels that much more modern than its predecessor. It's genuinely a really nice place to be. It feels like a 70s car, not the early 60s car that it is underneath. And being a 60s car underneath is one of the reasons why the Spitfire remains so resolutely affordable. As we said, it was based on the Herald. From day one, it got its 1147cc engine, which, as we said, grew over time. It got the Herald's famously brilliant and fantastically lockable rack and pinion steering. But the Spitfire was also anointed with front disc brakes for your sportier driving. So what's it actually like to fling around on a B road? Well, Let's flip it around in this tight gap here. We can see the rack and pinion steering doing its thing and find out. This later 1300 engine is a sweetie. It loves to rev, it's crisp, and it's torquey. Really nice sports car engine, easily a match for the 1275A series. The steering, as we said, Herald derived, is beautiful and it changes directions so willingly. Fling it in and it grips, and it grips and it rotates. If you wanted a recipe for what a small sports car should feel like, the Spitfire gets it perfectly right. It's flingable, it's nimble, it encourages you to play with it. And yet, there's not too much body roll, it's remarkably composed and planted. But if you do go into a corner with just a little bit too much gusto, it won't hesitate to fidget and remind you that it is light and it is rear driven. Get it in here, oh yes! And its lightweight rear drive and sweet handling made the Spitfire a remarkably successful rally car as well. It won the 1964 Tour de France Rally, the 1964 Geneva Rally, and the 1965 Alpine Rally. It really was something of a weapon on loose surfaces, but it was also something of a weapon for all the wrong reasons. The Spitfire's swing axle rear suspension layout, borrowed from the Herald of course, wasn't the most stable, and under particular cornering conditions at high speed or on camber changes on the road, the rear wheels could actually tuck in, causing the rear end to catch unwary drivers very much napping. Triumph later developed what they called the swing spring rear axle, where they took one leaf out of the arrangement and allowed all but one of the leaves to pivot freely, which therefore meant the diff could move and the rear wheels wouldn't tuck under quite as badly. As a result, a later Spitfire like this is far less likely to bite you, but it's still lightweight, it's still rear wheel drive, and it's still got fantastically snappy steering, so drive it respectfully. With that small issue of potentially deadly oversteer cured, the Spitfire kept its momentum going further. In 1974 came the 1500 version with a torquier, more cruising-oriented engine. Now, granted, there were some reliability issues with the 1500, but again, the Spitfire was so popular at this point that hardly seemed to matter. It got synchro on first gear to make it even more usable, reclining seats so it was more suited to the larger drivers amongst us, and again, more trim to revise and update the interior. The Spitfire was now a 12-year-old car, and yet it was as relevant and affordable and as fun as ever. The Spitfire's appeal endured throughout its 18-year life, and by 1980, Triumph had sold 315,000 of these cars, an impressive figure for any car, let alone a frivolous two-seater roadster. And that endures today. It's still one of the best and most popular entries into sports car motoring. There's fantastic aftermarket and club support, and it puts a smile on the face of classic motorists the world over. And they're still affordable. You can still get into one of these things for well under £5,000. And few classics for that money will make you smile quite so much. It's tremendous. We love a big Triumph here at Classics World. We love a TR6 and a Stag. But for me at least, when it comes to Triumph sports cars, the best things come in small packages.
This video is proudly sponsored by Lancaster Insurance. Give them a call on 01480 400 889 for an insurance quote on your classic car. And don't forget to click the link below to enter their latest competition.